Jesus wasn't poor, and you shouldn't be either. For many people, probably the number one reason for being wary of, or completely anti to, any teaching on biblical prosperity is the idea that Jesus was poor. I could show verse after verse in the Bible which demonstrate that it is God's desire for us to be rich, for us to have an abundance in order to bless others, and yet many people would say, well, yes, but wasn't Jesus poor? I could point to biblical examples about Abraham, David, and Solomon that show that they were undoubtedly rich, but it wouldn't matter because, but Jesus was poor. But was he? Let's start with the way that Jesus was born. In a stable, or probably more accurately, it was in a shepherd's cave, but that's not the focus here. Jesus being born in a stable of any kind is surely an example of being born into extreme poverty. But was it? Was Jesus born in a stable because Mary and Joseph were poor? Well, actually, no, that wasn't the reason at all. Jesus was born in a stable because Bethlehem was full due to the census/taxing that was taking place. In those days, Mary and Joseph couldn't phone ahead and book a room at an inn. They couldn't go onto the internet and find a room on one of the inn's websites. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, they just could not find anywhere to stay. It wasn't because money was an issue. The problem was that all of the inns had no vacancy signs in the window. Mary and Joseph could afford an inn, they just couldn't find a room that was available. I will point out that there is one aspect of Jesus' birth that does support the argument that Mary and Joseph were poor. After Jesus' birth, probably 40 days later after Mary's period of sanctification, they make a trip to Jerusalem to offer a sacrifice, and Mary and Joseph offer 2 turtle doves instead of bringing a lamb. This goes back to Leviticus 12:8, which says, "And if she be not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtles, or 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons." However, the King James Version does not specifically say if she is not able to afford a lamb. It just says, "and if she be not able." There could conceivably, therefore, have been other reasons why Mary and Joseph brought turtle doves or pigeons instead of a lamb. But whatever the reason, this one incident is not enough to claim that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were poor. The visit of the wise men, or magi, gives us another example that points to Jesus not growing up in poverty. After the trip to Jerusalem, Luke 2:39 states that Mary and Joseph returned to Nazareth in the north of Israel. If you investigate the account of the wise men, Rick Renner's book, Christmas, The Rest of the Story, would be a great resource for you to do this. You will find that the wise men didn't arrive until Jesus was about 2 years old, in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. Sorry, but nativity scenes and plays are not accurate. Anyway, the point is that the wise men brought gold, and if you look into it, it wasn't a small amount in a gift box as is often shown. Do you think that Mary and Joseph put that gold on a shelf in a place of honour, dusted it occasionally, like some Christians do with their Bibles, and showed it to their guests? No, of course they didn't. God had given them a very valuable resource to finance the responsibility he'd given them of looking after his son. And you can be sure that Mary and Joseph were diligent to make the best possible use of that resource. Based on what we have just looked at, we can be certain that Jesus' childhood was not one of poverty. Let's look now at Jesus' adult life and examine a favourite "but Jesus was poor" verse. Matthew 8:20. Jesus saith unto him, The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has not where to lay his head. The argument is that this verse means that Jesus was in effect homeless. He didn't even have anywhere to lay his head at night. But is that really what this verse means? Did Jesus and his disciples really sleep rough? No. When Jesus said this, he was not saying that he had nowhere to stay. he was referring to constantly staying in a different place due to him being a travelling rabbi. We know from the Bible that Jesus stayed in a number of different places. For example, his family's home in Nazareth would have been available when he was there, or Peter's house in Capernaum, see Matthew 8:14. There's also the house of Simon the leper in Bethany, see Matthew 26 verse 6, and Mary, Martha and Lazarus' house, which was also in Bethany. And what about the houses of Jesus' other disciples? There may have been times when Jesus did not have somewhere to stay, but this was not due to lack of money. In fact, and this is shocking news, Jesus may actually have had his own home in Capernaum. Here's some verses that point to this. Matthew 9:10 in the Jubilee Bible 2000 says, "And it came to pass, as he sat at food in his house." The Voice translation of this verse reads, "Once, when he ate a meal at home with his disciples." Then there's Matthew 13:1 and 36, also in the Voice translation. That same day, Jesus left the house and went to sit by the seaside. Then Jesus left the crowds and returned to his house. Mark 2 verse 1 in the New American Standard Bible says, "When they come back to Capernaum several days afterwards, it was heard that he was at home." Mark 7:17 in the Names of God Bible says, "When he had left the people and gone home." And Mark 9:33 in the Contemporary English Version says, "Jesus and his disciples went to his home in Capernaum." So although we cannot be 100% certain, there is a fair amount of evidence that Jesus was a homeowner. In fact, it may even have been Jesus' house that the paralysed man was lowered into by his 4 friends. Mark 2:1, which we've just mentioned, is the beginning of this account, which in many versions states that he was at home. Judas, yes, that Judas, points us towards believing that Jesus' ministry was also well financed. Judas was in charge of the ministry finances. He was the treasurer. He was also a thief, but apparently no one noticed. For this to be the case, there must have been a significant amount of money for Judas to be able to dip his hands into the purse and there still be plenty left over. If you steal money from a poor man, it's going to be pretty obvious. More evidence that there was no shortage of finance for Jesus' ministry is found in John 13. After Jesus told Judas, "That thou doest, do quickly," it is recorded that the disciples thought that Judas had either gone out to buy supplies or to give to the poor. Clearly, giving to the poor was a regular part of Jesus' ministry. How could he be given to the poor if he himself was poor? So if Jesus wasn't struggling to get by, and he was no longer working as a carpenter, where did his finances come from? Let's assume that the gold bought by the wise men had been used up by now, although we really have no idea how long it would have financed Jesus' family for. It would certainly have been a long time. But let's rule out the gold for now. The answer to the question of where Jesus' finances would have come from is found in Luke 8, verse 2-3 in the Names of God Bible. Also, some women were with him. They had been cured from evil spirits and various illnesses. These women were Mary, also called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, Joanna, whose husband Chusa was Herod's administrator, Susanna, and many other women. They provided financial support for Yeshua and his disciples. Of course, there could also have been other avenues of supply that the Bible doesn't mention. The crowds may well have given offerings, and we also know that Jesus and Peter's tax money, at least at one time, came from a fish's mouth. As we come towards the end of this devotional, let's move to the crucifixion. John 19:23-24 in the J.B. Phillips translation says, "When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they divided his clothes between them, taking a quarter share each. There remained his shirt, which was seamless, woven in one piece from the top to the bottom. So they said to each other, "Don't let us tear it. Let's draw lots and see who gets it." This happened to fulfill the scripture which says, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." Do you think that the Roman soldiers would have cared about tearing a poor man's clothes? Of course they wouldn't. They would have just ripped it up for fun and given everyone a piece. But the clothes that Jesus had been wearing were not a poor man's clothes. They were good quality clothes that soldiers desired to have for themselves. So contrary to popular opinion, if you examine the actual evidence in the Bible, Jesus was not poor. Which means that if we are to follow Jesus' example, we shouldn't be poor. And whatever God has called us to do should be well financed. We hope that you have enjoyed this devotional and that you have been blessed. Please like, share, comment and subscribe. Thank you.